Austin. This is Jen.
Hi. So we are actually not going to talk for super long. I know we have 20 minutes, but Austin's just going to give a quick intro to what marriage means to us, and then we're just going to open it up for questions because we'd rather talk about the vocation of marriage in terms of what you'd like to know about what it means to be married, about discerning a call to marriage, about recently or like being recently married. So we've had quite a few challenges actually in the first year of marriage, probably more than the average couple. And we're by no means experts, obviously. It hasn't even been a year, but we've definitely learned a lot and grown a lot in our love and our love of God. So Austin's going to give a quick intro to what marriage is, and then we'll answer any questions you have.
To quote a famous movie on sacramental theology, marriage. Okay, good. I was like, I hope they've seen it, otherwise I'm gonna look like a fool. So, anyways, that is my favorite movie, by the way. But okay, so just to talk a little bit about marriage as a sacrament in the church. So if you look in the Bible, marriage is, in a lot of ways, kind of the preeminent image of the relationship between God and his people. We see this, very explicitly in the Song of Songs. Even go to like the prophet Hosea. There's a strong marital imagery there where faithfulness to the covenant is kind of it's self-giving love in a deeply marital way, whereas to sin, to turn away from God, is basically adultery. So even in the Old Testament, there's this really profound image of marriage, and then in the New Testament, it gets taken up by Christ. St. Paul, Ephesians 5, talks about how the husband and wife, they sacramentally image Christ in the church. And so they're called to really image in their lives the love between Christ and the church. So it's something that is deeply ingrained in salvation history and in the theology of the church. And it's something that's very important, I think, to the life of the church, because I think married couples, they offer us an image of like how we should be in love with God. That is to say, a love that is total and all self-giving, a love that is entirely faithful to the bitter end or to the happy end, but hopefully not too bitter. But so it's very important in the life of the church. I think for that reason, that all people, regardless of what your vocation is, you can look at the vocation of marriage and say, like, I want to be in love with God like that, like passionately in love, passionately giving all that I have to God, and being open to all that God wants to give to me. And I think another way that marriage is really important in the life of the church is because in and of itself, it's actually a natural institution. So Christ, he elevates marriage within the church to the level of a sacrament, but in and of itself, it is just a natural institution. It's not naturally a sacrament. So the fact that Christ does elevate it to this level of sacrament, it shows, for one, like the goodness of creation, but it also shows the depths to which God has really injected himself and injected grace into the ordinary parts of our lives. And in particular, like, even though there's a lot of gloriousness and excitement to marriage, it also can be super mundane sometimes. Like, you come home after work and it's like, hey, what do you want for dinner? I don't know. What do you want? I don't know. Then you're like, oh, let's make this. We're like, oh, we're out of milk. So then you're like, oh, let's make something else. And then you look up a recipe, and then you're like, oh, we're out of paprika. Let's Google a substitute for paprika. So it's like this whole very mundane ordeal. And then there's the vanity of doing dishes, which never ends. I think that's what in Ecclesiastes Koheleth was talking about, vanity of vanities. He's talking about dishes. So there's like a lot of kind of mundaneness, a lot of repetitiveness in the married life. And yet, the fact that Christ has elevated marriage to the level of sacrament means that he's injected into those mundane moments grace. That doing the dishes is not just doing the dishes anymore, but it's actually a way to get to heaven. It's a way to enter into a deeper communion with God. Trying to decide what to eat, it now becomes an occasion of grace. So I think that's beautiful because it shows how much God cares about the little things and the mundane things. He's given kind of this like sacramentality to the mundane and the ordinary. And again, I think that's helpful in the life of the church because I think if we can start to develop that mindset that like doing dishes isn't just doing dishes or doing paperwork or whatever, pick any mundane task, because Christ has entered so deeply into the ordinariness of our lives, every little ordinary thing can actually be extraordinary and can become a grace-filled moment. I think that's all I wanted to say about marriage. So anyways, marriage is cool. You should do it if you're called to it. Anyways, okay, so any questions about like anything? Yes.
Do you feel like your wife is your soulmate?
Oh, that's a good question.
Do we believe in soulmates?
Shoot, this is a loaded question.
She's right there.
Cover your ears for a moment. Man, you had to ask that one. Okay.
What a question to start with.
I know, yeah.
Earmuffs.
Right. So, oh, whoops, I broke things. Oh no, did I break the mic?
You might have broke the mic.
Oh, we're still good. We're still good. Okay, great.
The one mic.
So, if by soulmate we mean like basically God set apart one person, and if I didn't like find that person, I'm SOL. I don't know, but I think definitely in the way that we met, there was definitely providence in it, and I feel like God, guided us to meet together and, to grow in our relationship. So, I don't know, at the end of the day, like, I feel like God drew us together, I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, I think, kind of like Austin said, maybe from the beginning, like, there's not necessarily, like, I don't know, like, none of us really know if there's one person that, like, from your birth, like, God has planned and intended you to be with this person. Because what if that person wrongly discerns their vocation? Are you just kind of like stuck without a person to marry? So in all of our decisions that we make, like, God is always working in that, I think. So like as you grow throughout your life and everything that's happening in your life, God is taking and redirecting you, right? It's not like he set one thing from the time you were born, like this is your plan, and if you screw it up, like you can't do anything, right? So whether this was something that was intended from the beginning of time, if that's what you mean by soulmate, I couldn't say, but I would definitely agree that there were a lot of ways in which we could see that it's something that God wanted for us and something that there was something unique about feeling called to each other. And that we both had something that the other needed, and that God was kind of bringing us together to help us grow in love with him. And there were a lot of little details in the way that we met that, like, there were lots of different pathways for us to get to know each other that almost did seem that there was definitely God's providence in aligning all of those details.
Yeah. Sarai.
So I heard you scored high in your cares on yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to take it, Father Andy?
The charisms inventory?
Maybe a little backstory about that.
Yeah, so I'll answer this one actually, because I think I scored higher.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a test called the charisms inventory where you answer a lot of questions and it can tell you potential charisms that you have. And I took it actually, I think we were already dating, weren't we?
Yes.
On a discernment retreat, I took the charisms inventory. And I scored really high on celibacy. I think, though, part of it is the phrasing of the questions, right? They ask you things like, I feel that I can serve God really well being single. And I answered yes to that question because being single, I could serve God really well. And being married, I also can serve God really well. So they're obviously, I mean, everybody has their vocation, and you're best able to serve God in the vocation that you have been called to. But before I entered into the vocation of marriage, like that time of being single is a really important time. And you're able to serve God in a unique way when you're single that you can't serve God in when you're married. And when you're married, you're able to serve God in a different way than you're able to serve God when you're single. So I think I scored high in celibacy because I did have that confidence being single, of like, I liked being single. I like being married too. But because I had been single for, my whole life, it was like, I knew that that was a way that I could serve God, that having independence where you're not taking other people into account when you're discerning things. My prayer life, the way that I relate to God, is different when it's just me and God and when it's me, God, and another person. And so that's been something that we've been growing in a lot since we've been married, is figuring out kind of how to integrate our prayer lives, of like not just like me spending time with God and him spending time on God, and like we both have a ton of prayer things that we do, or like we go to adoration together and both do our own thing, but actually being united and praying together, I think has actually been like a challenge to figure out. And that is because I think I have that independence of I know what it looks like. I have a lot of good examples in my life of what it looks like to serve God as a single person. And I think we haven't had a ton of really solid examples of what it looks like to serve God in marriage, which is why I actually think I probably scored so high in celibacy. But being confident as a single person and liking being single doesn't necessarily mean you're not called to marriage. I did discern religious life, and I did discern strongly a call to marriage, but I didn't want to start dating. So when we first started dating with my accountability partner, one of my best friends, I was like after a week of dating, I was like, I can't do this. Like, this is too hard. Like, I'm used to being single. I like being single. Like, I know what it looks like to have a relationship with God when I'm single. This is so different, right? And so I think that's okay. And like, it's a learning process. I don't know if I answered that well. You can
Sure, yeah.
add some stuff.
I have nothing to add.
Okay.
Yes, Mercy.
You were talking about Song of Solomon and how like marriage foreshadows Jesus' love for the church. So after you guys got married, did you like experience the Eucharist in like a different way?
That's a good question. Let me think about that. I think in some ways. What's that?
Yes or no?
Yeah. No, I think definitely in some ways, of like, but like with our vows and you know the ways that you can show affection in marriage, there's definitely like a deeper giving of self, and so to see that in the Eucharist, and also to be like I want to be like that for Jesus in the Eucharist, I think definitely. Yeah, and I like marriage is a mystery too, and not just because you're like, why did they squirt out the toothpaste like that, you know? But you're like more fundamentally, like it really is a mystery that's kind of like unfolding. So I think that's something we'll probably keep thinking about and reflecting on as time goes on.
Good question.
Yeah. Do you have anything to say?
No.
Okay. Cool. Yes.
Sorry, you can't see me. But Pope John Paul II says in one of his apostolic exhortations that the family is the like domestic church, like domestica, right? In the Familiaris Consortio, I think he says it. But up to what point, like, do you, when you're discerning marriage, like he's really big on it as far as he says, like, the family is the center of like the church in the sense that of building up the church and building up the body of Christ. Like the family is key. If the family's not there, the church falls, basically. So when you're discerning marriage, up to what point do you see it that way? You know what I mean? Or to what point do you just see like, I'm dating this girl and she's pretty and like, I want to start a family with her, obviously, and all those good reasons. But up to what point do you think about those deeper, like really deep theological aspects of marriage, which are like some of the most theological, earthly aspects we have, you know, in faith?
Also a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, thinking about the family is sort of the domestic church and being necessary to the life of the church. In the first place, just thinking in marriage of like we want to be saints, you know, that we want to give life to the church by our holiness, you know, by the way that we love each other, to be that sign of Christ in the church. Yeah, because I think we need that in the church to see people like couples who are, you know, in love, you know, like who really love each other, who are really, you know, faithful to each other, because it reflects again that relationship between Christ and the church. So that in one sense, but then also thinking about like when we eventually have kids, the idea of like raising them to also be saints. And I want to say it might be one of the prayers in the marriage liturgy, but it says something to the effect of in the like the fruitfulness of the couple and bearing children, they also add members to the church. So there's a really very real sense in which, you know, when we're having children, we're building up the church. Yeah, I don't know.
I think also your question made me think of Mother Teresa, and she's like, you want to change the world, like go home and love your family. That the family is the first place that we learn to love. It's the place where we should learn what God's love looks like. And that obviously doesn't happen in a lot of families. Like there's a lot of dysfunction in society as a whole. Like when we think about what we want our family to look like and what like a holy family would look like and what it would look like to raise children who understand the gospel and who know who Jesus is and who understand the teachings of the church, like, is a really daunting task, I think. But it's also super, super important because it's where we get so much from our families that we don't even realize, right? So many of our internal, like our habits, our little like idiosyncrasies, but like our worldview, a lot of that comes from the family. And so if you grow up in a family where like the gospel isn't lived, that's really hard to change when you're older. And that was something big they actually focused on in our marriage prep, was talking about like the little things that happen in your family, like what, I don't know, just the way that things are done, like you keep doing when you're an adult, and it's really hard to unlearn them. Even little habits, like he said, the toothpaste, like if you squeeze the toothpaste from the bottom of the tube or the middle of the tube. But like those habits, those are obviously trivial habits, but there's habits of the deeper things, the way you live your life. And a lot of that comes from our family without us even noticing. So when we have kids someday, there's a lot of pressure, but a lot of, what's the word? Like a big space there, or a lot of, I don't know how to say it.
Potential?
Potential, thank you. Because there is so much that comes from that family relationship.
Just to go back to the toothpaste thing, so she just like squeezes from anywhere. I do from the bottom, and she's like, it's like every time I squeeze it now, it's full.
I've never realized
it's a marvel.
There was a different way to do toothpaste.
Right, and in that way, I've helped her to encounter the transcendentals of God, so in a very small way, yes. Oh, that's so good, transcendentals.
You didn't even do it on purpose.
Oh, dang it, such an opportunity there. Missed opportunity. Can't get that one back.
All right, we have time for one more question. We're actually 5 minutes
So like marriage is like obviously really beautiful, it's a sacrament, but because it is considered to be like slightly, I guess, less than religious life in terms of like perfection, did you guys ever feel like disappointed or discouraged that you weren't really called to attain that level?
That is a good question. I think I've said that after every question. Oh, that's a good one. I'm just really buying myself time, you know, to.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me personally, I've never thought about it that way, because ever since I was little, like I wanted to get married. Deep down, I was always a hopeless romantic, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, so in college, I began to discern more intentionally, because for a while, like the priesthood was pretty attractive, and I was reading a lot about St. John Vianney, and I was like, okay, he's pretty baller. That's an ecclesial word, baller. The Council of Trent talked about it. It actually didn't, I'm sorry. But anyways, so, but during that time, like one of the things that really tipped me off to like, yeah, marriage is my vocation was reading Ephesians 5 and hearing St. Paul exhort husbands, you know, lay down your life for your bride. And there's something about that was so attractive that I was like, this is my path to sanctity. And it was clear like there was nothing else I could do. So even if like objectively, you know, like the priesthood would have been a higher calling, it was like for me, like I know this is what God is calling me to, and so there's nothing better I can do.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same thing, right? Like whatever your vocation is, no matter how much better or like attractive something else could be, like your vocation is the best place for you to be, and that's where you'll experience the most grace of God in your life and the most fulfilling path. I think also with that, something that really helped me to understand kind of the relationship between different vocations was on a retreat. They kind of said, or he was a priest, he's our vocations director, said, like, marriage gives an example to priests and to religious of how they should love the church and how they should love Jesus. It gives us a tangible thing to look at, like, this is what Jesus, or our love for Jesus and Jesus' love for us should look like. And then those in religious life show us that, like, marriage isn't the end goal, right? That, like, our calling for all of us, right, is to be to heaven and to be united in that way with Christ. And so those who have those vocations of the priesthood, consecrated life, they're showing us that, like, a marital relationship isn't the end goal. Like, the end goal is Jesus. But we give that kind of tangible, like, this is what that love with Jesus should look like.
All right, then. Thank you very much.
So I'm married as well. I'm sort of the transition figure here. So I'm not really going to talk about marriage exactly. I may touch on it. I'm really going to talk about vocation in a very general sense, based on kind of my experience and my thoughts on it. So I'm married. I have 3 kids, 1 on the way in January. Also, and I should say, just tossing us. I also have 2 that we lost along the way. This is like a real thing. So, talking about the kind of struggles of marriage. I wrote down my remarks because, I'm a nerd and I like words, and I'm also vain and like my words. And I wasn't also sure about what this was going to look like. So, it's kind of nice living room vibe I like. But I want to start by actually reading you this kind of lengthy quote from St. John Henry Newman. And that's because I just love it, and it's a relatively famous quote from one of his meditations, I think I first encountered this when he was beatified, maybe, like 10 years ago or something at this point, and then kind of encountered it again. So this is John Henry Newman. God has created me to do him some definite service. He has committed some work to me which he has not committed to another. I have my mission. I never may know it in this life, but I shall be told it in the next. Somehow I am necessary for his purposes. I have a part in this great work. I am a link in a chain, a bond of connection between persons. He has not created me for naught. I shall do good. I shall do his work. I shall be an angel of peace, a preacher of truth in my own place, while not intending it, if I do but keep his commandments and serve him in my calling. Therefore, I will trust him. Whatever, wherever I am, I can never be thrown away. If I am in sickness, my sickness may serve him. In perplexity, my perplexity may serve him. If I am in sorrow, my sorrow may serve him. My sickness or perplexity or sorrow may be necessary causes of some great end which is quite beyond us. He does nothing in vain. He may prolong my life. He may shorten it. He knows what he is about. He may take away my friends. He may throw me among strangers. He may make me feel desolate, make my spirit sink, hide the future from me. Still, he knows what he is about. And then he ends the meditation with a prayer. O Adonai, O ruler of Israel, thou that guidest Joseph like a flock, O Emmanuel, O Sapientia, I give myself to thee. I trust thee wholly. Thou art wiser than I, more loving to me than I myself. Deign to fulfill thy high purpose in me, whatever they be. Work in and through me. I am born to serve thee, to be thine, to be thy instrument. Let me be thy blind instrument. I ask not to see. I ask not to know. I ask simply to be used. So I treasured that quote for a long time, and many of you know that, Timothy just said it, I was for several years an Episcopal priest, an Anglican, and in the many years of slowly struggling and stumbling towards the Catholic Church, the same years in which I got married and had 3 children in 3 different states, because, and we're kind of continuing the trend. And I tried to finish my dissertation. Through all of that, through some bouts of anxiety and depression, Younan was for me a constant reminder of God's providence, that he knows what he is about. And I bring up Younan because I want you to notice that emphasis in those words. God knows what he's about, so we don't. Sometimes maybe we do. Many of you are probably more holy and know what you're doing. Often we like to think that we know what we do, but Christianity is not a call to know what we are doing. It's a call to follow Jesus. So I'm very conscious of that ignorance because I am currently on track to be both a Catholic priest and a husband. So 2 vocations in the way that the church speaks about them. Sort of I'm a transition and an oddity. And both of those things are supposed to be comprehensive in their demands, right? I have no idea how I'm really supposed to do both. My spiritual director tells me that he doesn't really know either, and but we're gonna figure it out, right? All of this leads me to the main point that I want to make. That often, I think the language of vocation can be unhelpful and maybe even misleading. Now, bear with me, don't call me a heretic yet. I know some of you are going to think that. I know that vocation, just the language, is very much part of the tradition, and it's not going anywhere. And of course, it does speak to something true, right? God does call us each to communion with him. That's that universal call. And that universal call looks different in each individual person. And that's just because, communion is a personal reality. And that's all true and good. But here's where it can become a problem. A lot of the time, we talk about vocation as something that you have to find or discover. And of course, that's true too in the sense that everyone just has to figure out how to live your life. But speaking about things like married life or single life or religious life or priestly life or whatever the calling is, it can suggest to us that we do not have very much to do with it, and that we have to just kind of sit around, waiting to hear God's, assignment for us, which will no doubt show up as some sort of, Mission Impossible kind of thing that you kind of see, and then it self-destructs, right? And so when we don't receive that kind of, miraculous intervention, we then, the kind of next step is to then think of vocation as something that we then have to work really hard to discover. And so we treat God's will for our lives as this kind of sacred puzzle waiting to be solved, And that can be exhausting, right? If we then treat our whole life as a kind of, tentative prologue to some great drama which is waiting to be unveiled. So when I was in college at the University of Richmond, I remember I was involved in InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. This was, by the way, the first time I ever became friends with Catholics, strangely enough. And I remember our staff leader at one point kind of going on a rant and kind of calling out all the men of our group for our kind of cowardly approach to relationships. Basically, no one was dating at all. It was just, And so what happens is you take a sort of very strong, commitment to, a noble commitment to sexual purity, and you combine that with the kind of view of vocation that I've just been describing, and you had, on the whole, basically a bunch of young women who were really frustrated with guys who seemed interested, but could never actually quite ask anyone out because, dating leads to marriage, and marriage is, a vocation, and what if you're not called to marriage and you get it wrong, right? That's scary. I suspect you all know better than that. You're much smarter and more clever, right? The dating, the courting, that's all part of the discernment. Just as someone, just as if you are looking at a religious vocation, you spend some time there, right? You don't just kind of go sit in a corner and kind of discern, right? You have to go through some preliminary steps. So in the church, vocation, of course, has a kind of technical meaning about different states of life. So that's kind of part of what we're, certainly representing on this panel. And often the call is it's a matter of recognizing the church's call as God's call, precisely because Jesus has promised to act through the church in particular ways. Really, though, the particular call has has to do less with the call into a state of life, I would say, than the call to live in it. If that makes sense as a distinction. So if you are married, you have a vocation to marriage, right? In the sense that God's particular task for you as a married person is and must remain to be faithful to your spouse. If you are a priest or a religious, your vocation is to be faithful to the vows that you've taken before God. Right? So what I'm suggesting is that vocation is more useful in describing our life in particular states than it is in describing how we get to them. I just confess, and this is where I'm, maybe just kind of trying to be the rebel here, but I have to confess that I do not like talk about vocation that suggests it must mean that doing this or that thing is God's particular assignment to you. So this kind of connects to this, like the soulmate conversation, right? It's a very similar thing. Because this can lead to a very superstitious kind of view of fate. It's kind of it's a flattening of how grace actually works. It far too quickly equates or conflates human work with divine will. I'm reminded, and I don't know, this may be sort of a random aside, but I'm reminded of how certain kind of ultramontanist thinkers will equate, every word from the papal lips as some kind of utterance of the Holy Spirit. Right? This is a deeply problematic and even anti-Catholic way of thinking. And it is a kind of a slippery slope. I mean, it's not all that different, and I say this from experience, from the various kind of Protestant synods, like in my former Episcopal church, where they thought, oh, a majority vote means the Holy Spirit has spoken, right? And so you just kind of vote to change the definition of sacraments to suit the latest trend. So I would be very hesitant to say that even the Pope is called in the sense of being specifically appointed by God. The Pope certainly has a vocation. It is the same as any other Christian to be faithful to God in the particular place where he is. And it is a particular place, right? It's not ours. And God will certainly use him in all sorts of ways that we may or may not be able to identify to accomplish God's will. But speaking of vocation can all too easily become a way of giving a kind of divine stamp on human activity. So the question for most of us is not, what is God calling me to do? But it's kind of a combination of, what do I want to do? And what am I able to do with the gifts that God has given me? So that's where that kind of discernment of gifts is a somewhat different thing. Whether or not the quiz helps with it, I don't know. I remember taking one of those back in the day. The Baptists do it too. I remember it's a fascinating process. So these are questions that we often have to ask ourselves with other people who may be able to tell us better than ourselves what our gifts are. I may want to devote my life to editing digital images, but I'm colorblind, so it does kind of limit my options. And I learned this while it was a job I was trying to get in college, and they're like, no, you can't do that. Sorry. It's not so much. We talk a lot about prudence in Catholic morality, and prudence is really central to any talk of vocation as well. It's not so much prudence in discerning the mysterious will of God, so much as in prudence of rightly reading yourself and the world you're in, and how to follow Jesus in the concrete moment. This is, and I'm almost at the end of this. So I've given a lot of kind of critical remarks about how not to talk about vocation. So let me close with just some positive suggestions, and this is kind of where we get to the title that I gave to Timothy. So I wonder, and this is really kind of, I'm wondering, I'm not arguing exactly, whether the language of oblation would be more practically helpful for us in a lot of cases. So that word oblation in the tradition, it comes up as like in the early church, it's sort of shorthand for the Eucharist, right? It's the idea of a sacrificial offering. We use the term today, a lot of times, you probably are familiar with the term oblate, right? Like if you're an oblate of a monastery, you're kind of trying to live a religious vocation, but not attached to the community in a slightly different way. So I suggest that term, because it seems to me a more honest description of what we're doing. So I'm not claiming that my actions are the expression of God's eternal purposes. I just think that's too big of a thing to say. I am rather offering myself in service to those purposes and in the hopes that God will use me in this particular way. And I think that really summarizes Newman's prayer, and I'll just repeat this here. It's that he says at the end, "Thou art wiser than I, more loving to me than I myself. Deign to fulfill thy high purpose in me, whatever they be. Work in and through me. I am born to serve thee, to be thine, to be thy instrument. Let me be thy blind instrument. I ask not to see, I ask not to know, I ask simply to be used." All right, so that's all I have to say. Questions, I guess, or unless I took all my time, I don't know.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, clarify one of your points about, like, when you're in a specific vocation, like, that's your vocation. So, like, I wasn't religious for 4 years. I just turned out, and now I'm here. Or whatever. There's multiple people that are like that, or vice versa, or whatever, who are married and then, So, I guess I just want, I don't know, can you expand on that point more as far as, like, so because you're in, whatever, if you're married, like, you're called to the married life because you're married, like, what happens before that, in that sense, like, how do you define vocation up to that point, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I'm much more comfortable speaking about universal vocation in the sense that, like, every person is called to follow Jesus. They're called to holiness of life. And I don't want to say that it's, I'm not trying to say, like, it's not a calling in any absolute sense. It's just that I don't know that that's always helpful in actual discernment, because we kind of think about it in this almost magical way. And at some point, we just have to make decisions, right? And a lot of times it's other people making decisions for us, like when it comes to, like, religious life or ordination, these kind of things where, like, you get to a certain point and then it's not up to you, right? So yeah, to me, I think it makes a lot of sense. And actually, when a lot of the church documents speak about vocation, a lot of times the language, you can link it to those particular states of life, in that, when you're in marriage, this is what you're called to do. It's simply a call that it's particular to that state of life. And I think part of it, when it comes to, like, religious vocations, if you just start claiming that I just don't like too closely linking that kind of all those particular vocations with, again, the kind of absolute will of God, because people make mistakes. They do, and that's okay. I was kind of like, we're talking about the soulmate thing. The idea that, like, this is where it's kind of misleading, like, when it comes to marriage, this idea of marriage, when you speak about it absolutely as this kind of vocation, something that you're called to, that makes it's kind of like destiny, and you have to, like, find it. And I think that, you may be, leaning in that direction. It may be something you want, but I don't think that, like, you then get to say, because you don't find that special someone, that you have, like, failed in your vocation. Like, it's just, that's not how it works. And some of those, in some cases, like with religious life, obviously there's, like, steps in discernment where you're sort of, partly, living under it, and marriage change too. When people die, and I mean, my wife and I tell each other all the time, if you die, I'm gonna become X, Y, and Z, and depending on what month it is, it's a different order, right? But who we've been, like, reading or being inspired by recently, there's always, like, oh, like, I would really love to, go into that life, but that's not, like, that's the thing, like, that's not something I'm free to discern right now. It's just not that's not my state of life, And for very strange historical and exceptional reasons, I do have the ability to discern priesthood as this kind of like rare exception that's been given, a kind of dispensation. But even that, it's something that was largely not. I mean, I did pursue it, but it was also kind of given to me. Like yeah. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Last
Ella.
question.
Oh, okay. Make it a good one.
I don't remember their names, but in the Middle Ages there was this family where the dad decided that he was called to be a hermit, so he left and became a hermit, and then one of his kids did the same when they left their family and went and became a hermit, and they're recognized as saints, and their family
Wow.
was like supposedly totally chill with it. I guess there's not really a question like what do you think about that? I think that the idea of marriage is
Was there a toothpaste debate on that thing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It sounds fine. I could imagine that, and it's maybe. I mean, I can't. Sometimes I would like to be a hermit. I would much rather be a hermit than like have my 2-year-old banging on the door at 5 a.m. But I don't think that's what I don't think in my current state of life. I don't think that's an option to me. But certainly I can it makes sense that there are historical examples of places where in a certain family situation that might make sense. I mean, I don't know. Interesting.
Thank you. I went to Anglican school for like 15 years, so like coming here and like finding the real presence of the Eucharist was like, So how did you go from? How'd you go from like experiencing what you thought to be a very real experience or relationship with Jesus and the Anglican Church, and then knowing that the Catholic Church can offer you the real presence of Christ, and like how do you go from like moving from your feelings and what like feels very real to like conviction?
Yeah, wow, that's a good question. I mean, it's for me, it's over many years. I mean, it's just kind of like, for me, it's very important to understand there's, and the church, especially in the kind of ecumenical document, speaks a lot about like degrees of fullness and these kind of things. And so for me, it was never a matter of like rejecting something. It was simply like embracing more, And I think I recognize that. So I was in the very kind of Catholic wing of Anglicanism, and I mean, we did the works. We did benediction of the Blessed Sacrament. We did, everything, and so my theology was very Catholic for a long time, and it was more the practical, like, well, we're in division, it's kind of a accident of history. It's unfortunate, and I think. For me, it was a combination of being, really convicted on the necessity of, union with Rome and on a personal level, and also just realizing all the things I loved about Anglicanism were actually Catholic, and like just kind of being honest about that like, I'm going to stop kidding myself. And having children, I mean, this is where it connects with like marriage, vocation, and children. Having children changed that. I think it was one thing to be a kind of, wandering. Well, not wandering, but like to be a kind of cleric, kind of carving out my own kind of Catholic theology in the Episcopal Church. But when it comes to like actually trying to like rationalize that to your children, like it just doesn't make sense. Like either you are or you aren't Catholic, and I think that was one of the kind of moments that really like pushed us over the edge. Yeah.
All right then, guys.
Thank you. Okay, so I brought something for show and tell. It's a handout. It's called the Vocation Tree. And it was put together by a friend of mine who lives a form of consecrated life that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. Let me know if you can't hear me. Okay, so I like this representation because it starts with baptism. Everybody has a vocation to holiness. And so lucky you found your vocation, right? We all have the same vocation, and if you were wondering what your vocation is, now you know. Call to holiness, every one of us. Okay, and so there's that, and that's the universal call that we're all called to. But there are specific states in life, as you know, I'm sure. And we can break it down into ordained, laity, and consecrated life. So ordained, of course, would include the priesthood. And it would also, and future. And it would include the diaconate as well. The laity would include, well, you all are lay members of the laity, of course, as far as I know, except you and, well.
Almost him.
And what?
Almost him.
Almost him, yeah. And except me too. And then there's the consecrated life, and that includes many, many things. You all, I'm sure, know about religious life, religious brothers, religious sisters, and within that realm, you have apostolic life and you have contemplative life. So, for example, the Carmelites, the Discalced Carmelites, like Saint Therese, that was a purely contemplative religious life, religious vocation. And apostolic life, maybe like Mother Teresa, the Missionaries of Charity. But most communities have some sort of mix between the apostolic and the contemplative life. So there's that. There's also diocesan hermits that very few people know about. We were talking about hermits a little earlier. But there are people who are hermits for a particular diocese, and so the bishop is basically their superior, so to speak, and they do take vows, et cetera, but without living in a community. Then there are secular institutes. How many of you have heard of secular institutes? A few, okay. And there's also, what is this? Societies, different societies of apostolic life. And then there is consecrated virginity lived in the world. How many of you have heard of that? Oh, really? Okay, well then I don't need to talk here. So that's the vocation I'm living, actually. And so really it's similar to marriage in the sense that you are a living image of the love of the church, the bride, and her love for Christ, the bridegroom. So it's very spousal, and yet it's celibate at the same time. So you are, through the rite of consecration, mystically espoused to Christ. And those aren't my words, but that's what the rite itself says, and that's what is in canon law, etc. So I don't live in a community, but I do belong to an association, which is optional. I was consecrated by a bishop, 17 years ago, and I have to say I feel every single day like I'm one of the luckiest people on the face of the planet. So you'll see up above the different avocations, so different professions, doctor, dentist, teacher, nurse, whatever, up here. I think sometimes what can happen that's unfortunate is people get so focused on the question, what is my career, that we forget to ask the question, what is my state in life? What is my calling as a state in life, right? So you may feel called to be a social worker, for example, and you may be focused on that, and that's very good. That's wonderful. But there's also the question, in what way should I be a social worker? As a married person, as a single person, as a sister, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's important to keep those two things in order, even though it can be really, really hard to be a student and trying to think of a career, but also thinking about your state in life. Obviously, this doesn't capture everything, all the different possibilities. So for example, he is married and will also be ordained as a priest. And there's dedicated single life, which is distinct from consecrated life because you don't take vows. A lot of people, right? Like right now, you are single, most of you, I think, except you all. And that's a good thing. You're still living your vocation. When you're single, you're still living your vocation. I think that's important to remember. When I was discerning my vocation, I thought for many years, oh, I have to figure it out. It's like reading tea leaves, and I have to figure it out. And if I mess up, then I'm doomed, I'm doomed forever. But really, it was through coming to understand God's love that I came to have a sense of real freedom, and had a sense that it was really a choice. Now, God doesn't, not everybody can do everything, right? But I think God oftentimes gives us a choice. And I wanted to just share something kind of personal. When I was discerning, I had made a vow when I was very young. And so I felt called, to be a bride of Christ in some way. But I was very young, and I just said, okay, Lord, this is my intention here. I'm offering you this vow, but I was only 15. And I said, so Lord, if it's not your will, you have to show me. Otherwise, I'm going to assume it's your will. And so many, many years later, he put a man in my life who was wonderful. He would have made a great husband, a great father. And it kind of came out from, I don't know where it came from, because it's not like we were dating. I was off to go visit a religious community, and he said, I totally respect your vocation, whatever that is, but if you get over there and you discern out, it was a religious community, he said, I'll be here waiting patiently. So at that moment, it was as if Jesus was standing in front of me saying, here's marriage, and here's consecrated life, and whatever you choose, I'm going to use that to draw you to myself. Because your vocation is to be holy, to grow in my love. And it was really at that moment that I was able to make a clear choice and say, I give my life to you, Jesus, as your bride. It was kind of silly. It was kind of like, you respect my freedom. So it made me love him even that much more. It made me even that much more sure of my vocation. But one of my prayers for you all is that you will see that God is calling you to union with him, whatever it is you do in your life, and to keep that first and foremost, which also means nobody's off the hook, right? You could say, oh, I'm off the hook. I don't have to deal with kids in the middle of the night, or I don't have to say Mass at 5 a.m. if my superior wants me to. But nope, nobody's off the hook. We're all called to grow in holiness. We're all called to grow in love and charity. Okay, so I brought also a list of just maybe some tips that might be helpful if you're discerning your vocation. So first of all, pray. If you want to know what your vocation is, you have to ask God. So pray, ask God to show you what your vocation is. Keep in mind also that he's calling you to that which is going to make you happy. He's calling you to happiness, to beatitude, to eudaimonia, if you're taking any of my classes. So ask him to show you, and ask with a receptive spirit, with a receptive heart. Don't go and say, Lord, I want this, and you have to make it happen right now, right? Go and say, here I am, Lord, I come to do your will. What do you want for me? So ask, pray with an open heart. Ask God to give you the grace to be open, because sometimes it's hard to be open. You have to make yourself vulnerable when you say, here I am, Lord. I come to do your will, but what is that? Where are you going to take me? So pray for courage also. So the grace to be open and to courage, and ask God to give you a generous heart, to be willing to go beyond your comfort level, perhaps. So ask for that grace. And keep in mind also that prayer is also about listening to what God says. There's, yes, Lord, this is what I'm asking. Yes, Lord, this is what I'm saying. These are my thoughts. But prayer is also listening to God. And sometimes you just have to wait and wait and wait and wait and trust. And it can be hard. But so listen. Ask, but also listen. And then finally, be patient, because sometimes it doesn't happen overnight. Also, sacraments, stay close to the Eucharist. I think that's the most important thing to do. If you're trying to find God's will, if you're trying to grow in holiness, if you're trying to discern like religious life or marriage or whatever, stay close to the Eucharist, because he is the divine Lamb and he will show you the way. Learn about what your options are. There are, I don't know if you've heard of Guide to Religious Ministries for Catholic Men and Women. You have? Okay. Nobody else has? Okay. I have their website if you want it, but it's Guide to Religious Ministries for Catholic Men and Women. And it's a very comprehensive gathering of all the different orders, all the different forms of consecrated life, etc. And they have a cool search engine. Type in like Carmelites, we'll see what comes up, or like teaching communities, and you can see what comes up. Also, talk to someone who's trustworthy. Talk to a spiritual director if you have one. If you don't have one, maybe ask Austin to help you find one. Maybe go on a retreat. That can be very helpful, to just step away from everything, step away from the pressures, step away from feeling like you have to figure things out, and just be with God. So retreats can be super helpful. And look to the saints. Ask the saints to pray for you. Ask Our Lady to pray for you. I have to say, I spent years and years and years hoping that my vocation was to religious life, hoping I had a vocation to be a cloistered nun. I spent some time with some Poor Clares and with some Cistercians, and then I was in France with a community. And I so wanted that to happen, and I was trying to make it happen because I wanted it so much. And I got so tired that I finally just said, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore, Lord. I don't have the energy anymore. Here I am, and I'm listening. And so I made a novena to Padre Pio. I said, Lord, I'm tired. I'm not doing this anymore because I don't know. It's more me. I'm trying to do my will, and now I'm ready to let go and say, here I am. What do you want me to do? So I made this novena to Padre Pio. Oh my gosh. The red carpet it rolled out in front of me, and everything just fell into place, fell into place, fell into place. So maybe go to him or your favorite saint. And maybe also, if you think you might have a vocation to consecrated life, you can always go and visit communities. Don't go thinking, okay, they're going to meet me at the door and I'm going to have to sign my name in blood. It doesn't work that way. You have to wait. You have to apply. You have to enter. You have to be a postulant, novice, temporarily professed, all of this. So don't not go because you're afraid of what they might ask you to do on the front doorstep. Just go. Even if you're sort of thinking maybe, but probably not, you can always go and look. Come and see, sort of thing. I know a lot of people who entered communities and then left, and I have not yet met one of them who regrets having done that. So don't be afraid, to echo our beloved St. John Paul II. Do not be afraid. So any questions? Yes.
I know it's really hard to know if like God is calling you or you're calling yourself.
Yeah.
Like this discerning thing can get really complicated because then we get to a point where we're discerning about discerning and it's like we're overthinking it. So when do you think is the point where you have gathered like enough information from everything to like make does it just come down to like gathering enough information, exploring options, and make a decision like at the end of the day?
God works differently with everyone. So I don't think there is one, cookie cutter, this is how it's going to happen. Because we're all so unique, So. Yes?
I'm just curious, you said you belong to a society of apostolic life? Or
I'm a consecrated virgin, so I'm not, it's really a very unique form of consecrated life because it doesn't fit into any of these other categories. It's kind of its own category. So yeah, it's consecrated virginity.
So, but you're not affiliated with any institution or?
I am a member. There's a U.S. Association of Consecrated Virgins.
Okay.
I have their website address here.
So then I guess
I think it might be. Is it on the back of this? No. But anyway, you can just Google like consecrated virgins.
So then I guess my question is it hard for you? I guess with the life here, is very beautiful. I think it's super important because, well, yeah, I feel like it's a beautiful way to serve our Lord, and being, like in the world, not of the world, like literally consecrated to Christ.
Right.
My question was, do you find it hard sometimes, like living without a community? As far as like how does that affect your daily, your prayer life or your your daily routine,
There is sort of a safety net if you're in a community and they have their, their structure, their prayer times, etc. So I don't have that. So really I have to be accountable for that before my divine spouse. And also I think to not take anything for granted, to every day say, Lord, I need your help. Show me how to do this. Help me to always be receptive to what you want me to do. Because I don't take a vow of obedience and have a superior saying, okay, now do this and this and this. So I have to constantly put before the Lord whatever is going on in my life and say, here's what's happening. Here's what I feel like doing. Is this your will? And it's really helpful to have a spiritual director as well. But yeah, it can be challenging. But really, I think any vocation has its challenges. Marriage is a sacrifice. Priesthood, I think, is a sacrifice. A little bit.
Just on Friday nights in here.
Just on, yeah. So yeah, every vocation has its difficulties, its sacrifices, and its joys.
We have time for one more question.
Which way does Jesus use the toothpaste too?
Oh yeah. Thank you so much for asking that, because I did want to mention one of the benefits of consecrated life is that however, I have to say, I have been asking our Lord Carpenter that he was to make me bookshelves, and he still has not. So you probably have better luck in that arena than I do.
Remind me of that later.
You have bookshelves? See, he says he has
God provides.
St. Joseph.
Yeah, St. Joseph.
All right, let's give her a
You can just say father. You don't have to you have to be weird. Somebody passed me a paper plate.
A big one or a small?
No, like one of the ones I can write on. One of the big ones, yeah. You said there was going to be a whiteboard. You never said that. Okay. I remember being perpetually confused, which is what you guys call discernment. So I'm going to say a couple of things just to help kind of clarify what I think that means, at least from the experience that I've had as youngin' like you guys 30 or 40 years ago. and then as a vocation director, and then as rector of a seminary, and then having to deal with you for way too long. Let's see. Let's go back to logic. Yay!
Easy course.
It was easy, yes. Okay. So I'm writing on this, the genus and species. You remember that when you have to make a definition.
Yes.
And then there's the individual. So form specifies genus, matter individuates species. So you're animals, as you all know. Animals, that's your genus. Species is human. And then
Except for some of them.
for most of you. And then individual is you in your particularity. Listen, insofar as you are an animal, it's built into you to reproduce. Insofar as you are human, you are called to marriage. You guys get this? All of you are called to marriage insofar as you are human and have this kind of body with this kind of reproductive system and need for community and want to love another. All of you are called to marriage, period. Some of you, in addition to this calling, as individuals, God is inviting you also to consider a consecrated type of life. You guys see the difference here? And in the case of some of the men, he might be calling some of you to a sacramental ordained ministry. So don't think of this as either or. It's not really the right way to think about it. It's not, God didn't create any of you to not be married. Do you guys understand that? He called some of you, though you are called to marriage in your species, in your humanity, there's something that he's calling you to forsake that in the case of consecrated life. Are you guys seeing that? Okay, good. I don't know if that's more or less confusing, but it's the way that I've come to understand it. It's given me some clarity. I have no comment on soulmate. I really don't think that's real. I'm sorry. Does that mean?
No. I agree.
Sarai agrees, but she's bitter. I'm joking. We have a history. Okay. I don't get the test thing. Somebody tell me about these tests you were taking. That's weird. Don't do that. Don't do those tests.
Why?
Okay, listen. Let me say this. Spiritual direction is not magic. Okay? Do not go to a spiritual director and think that he's going to solve all your problems for you and answer all your questions. Definitely don't come to me, even for spiritual direction, which isn't even that. Okay? No, you can come to me for advice on stuff, but in the end, one of the things that's part of your calling all the way down here in your baptismal vocation is something that Dr. Keyes mentioned, which is the virtue of prudence, which means figure out your own crap. That is the virtue of prudence that you were called to. Is that the way you would say it? Yeah. Okay. So what I would do when I was 17, 18, 19 years old in the seminary and very, very kind of in a very cloudy place as far as what I wanted to do with my life, I would ask all kinds of priests for different advice and just their sort of viewpoint on a very particular question. The way that you guys are doing in this panel, I realize it's good that you're doing this. And they would all give me different answers. No two priests ever told me the same thing. And I would look, okay, that's confusing. Well, let me look to the saints. And the saints have all kinds of different ways to understand things. They don't necessarily say contradictory things. Sometimes they do. But sometimes they'll sort of give you a different approach, a different angle. So in the end, just understand that part of your vocation, as insofar as you're not just specifically human, but a baptized member of the church, part of your vocation is to kind of work through the confusion. And don't feel like because you're confused, there's something bad about you. You guys, are you seeing that? There's nothing wrong. For an 18-year-old to be confused is the most natural thing in the world. Okay. I was going to say something else I forgot about. I'll get back to that. Let me say a little bit about priesthood, just as a sort of specific vocation. And this is something that's, I belong to a church that has married clergy. My diocese, there's about 4 or 5 married priests in my diocese. So in the Eastern churches, it's a sort of very normal thing where a married man can be invited by a bishop to enter formation and to be ordained a deacon and then a priest. So I'm going to speak about just what the priestly vocation is in itself. Whereas I know all of you guys who are discerning the priesthood are discerning it correctly as this or marriage. I get that. I mean, I was doing the same thing. But that's not exactly a black and white thing as Dr. Key is illustrating, as a lot of the brother priests in my diocese are illustrating. But I want to talk about what it means to be a priest specifically. And I'll just give you one image that I heard during the 50th anniversary celebration of one of the priests in my diocese. And one of the people, they were kind of going up and speaking about different things, and they were giving funny stories from the seminary back in the day in Baghdad, and there's hilarious stories from the seminary in Baghdad 50 years ago. But one image was brought forth during that dinner by the bishop, who described a priesthood as a bridge between the laity and Christ. So the baptized, so the priesthood of the baptized, they receive their sacraments through the priesthood of the ordained. So he understood it as a bridge or as a sort of ladder. It's a sort of common image in the scriptures and in the fathers of the church. But the point that this bishop was making that I found very insightful is ladders operate, they do their job only when they're being stepped on. And I'm not inviting you to step on me, do not. But that's the particular type of vocation that you're being called to, is the job of the priest, the ordained priesthood, is to sanctify the laity. The job of the laity is to sanctify the world. That's the way it was sort of given to me Archbishop Younan actually explained that to us in the seminary. So these are sort of different angles to understand what the priesthood is. But just like any image I give you, if you think about it as a ladder or a bridge or as sort of another layer or whatever, every image is going to fall short of what a reality is. And it's always going to be a little bit more weird than you think. And the confusion does not end when you figure out what you want to do and what God is calling you to do. It doesn't stop there. So expect that confusion will continue as long as you're in this life of, in this body of death, as St. Paul calls it. Okay. I do want to say one thing about this. And this is really in agreement with, I think, what a lot of people have said so far. Right and wrong, morality is up here. Natural law is about our species as human and the way we should be acting as human. You guys get this? Your vocation is not a matter of sin or not sin. If you feel like, oh, maybe I'm called to consecrated life, and then you get married, you didn't commit a sin there. You guys understand that? There was a generation, but there was a time in the church where there was so much pressure put on people to sort of consider vocations, where it was made almost this moral imperative that you're like rejecting God. And even I, in my own ministry, there were times when I would speak in ways that would sort of suggest that, and I think that's very, very wrong. It's an invitation. The word vocation means calling in the sense of invitation. But if you refuse one invitation and accept another invitation, both of which are from God, you haven't done anything wrong. You guys get that? So take some of the pressure off of yourselves. It might help with some of the confusion. And in the end, do what you want. Really, God is calling you, and like you were saying earlier, like He sort of laid both before you. You chose the one that, and you don't have any regrets, right? No. Yeah, I have no regrets either. I think most people who followed God in the way that they felt called with an open heart, very few of them would say that they regret it. And it's probably not the fault of the vocation if they did. So I don't know. I guess that's it. Let me see. Yeah, that's it. Any questions? It's really hot in here, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't like this. You had one job. Who's AC guy? It's off. And we're like, all this hot air is coming out of us up here. All right, questions? Anyone? Yes, no, please.
So you said like don't feel like it's a sin if you reject this invitation because you're taking another one. But would it be if you don't
Nope.
explore the option though?
No. I'm of this very strong opinion that not everyone is even called to even consider consecrated life. It's a weird life, and it's only for weird people. And I'm speaking on behalf of myself, because my celibate vocation I consider as no, it's not for everybody even to consider. I think the vast majority of people, and St. Paul speaks in that way. I had my Bible somewhere. St. Paul speaks in that way. Like, look, for St. Paul, he was a little mean about it. You guys know how St. Paul talks about it? Like, I mean, if you can't handle it, then yeah, get married. That's the way he said it. That's a little bit of, St. Paul was kind of mean. But he understood just human nature being what it is. It's the kind of Catholic college thing that every girl has to consider being a nun and every guy has to consider being a priest. Sure, think about it. If like after 5 minutes you're like, I don't know, then you're done. You're done discerning. Don't bother yourself any more than that. Really. Because you guys torture yourselves, honestly. I don't know how you live. Okay, sorry. Does that answer? Does that help? Okay. Oh, that's so much. AC so much better. Yeah. Julia.
Do you think like individuality and wanting to be independent is a sign of immaturity, or is that just a grace that?
No, I love it.
Not grace.
I'm actually really liking this diocesan hermit thing. I'm gonna look into this. Does that mean I don't have to talk to anybody?
That is literally
Okay.
you.
Diocesan hermit, Father Andy. Okay. What was your question? I forgot the question.
Is individuality or like wanting independence naturally within you, is that a sign of like immaturity, would you say, or is that something?
Oh, I don't know. I think that's up to. It just sort of depends where it's coming from. Yeah. In my case, yes. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how like religious live in a community. I can't.
Or married people.
Or married people for that matter. Yeah. I've been in here with you guys for like an hour and I can't stand it. I'm not even joking. Yeah.
Thanks, Ron. I guess this is more towards kind of like universal call of holiness. So I guess anybody can answer, but I wanted to ask you because of your deep intellectual abilities.
Mocking me. Okay.
So with I was talking with some friends about this, but with the universal call of holiness, as far as you're a priest.
True.
Yeah. Very true. So at the heart of the gospel, we have the redemption, the cross. It's like that's what distinguishes us as Christians, as Catholics, is the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. And how, that's it. So for I guess even our generation and younger generations, more and more are being taught to kind of neglect all forms of sadness and suffering, and that's such a key part to the Christian Catholic faith is redemption.
Is there a question here?
Huh?
Is there a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So how, like as a priest, do you see us like fulfilling that universal call to holiness when that is such a crucial part to
Yeah, sure.
our faith? Yeah.
Look, I mean, I think any grown-up will tell you, like, you don't get to choose whether you suffer or not. You're going to suffer. Like, your life is going to suck really bad, really well. So you don't get to choose. You really don't. It's going to find you. What you get to choose is whether you react to it like a big boy or like a little drama queen. Not you particularly, not everybody. So it's a really good question because that's exactly the mechanism one of the mechanisms through which God sanctifies us. We suffer. It's not, and don't ever think that God is like pinpointing you to make you. It's just part of being a human being. So that's there. You suffer. You eventually learn to accept it with humility and with grace. That itself is sanctification. That's what sanctification means, or it's sort of one aspect of it. It means kind of growing up and realizing, the world doesn't revolve around me. I don't get everything I want, and that's okay. And it's not the end of the world. And that's really beautiful. That kind of act of humility to say, I'm going to be happy even though I don't have what I want because I have God. That's awesome, and that's universal. That's transvocational. Everyone is going to be invited to do that in their life many, many times. Whether it's you're having, I don't know, this is a total, I'm just picking it out of thin air, like disagreements with bishops maybe, I don't know. Whether you're having toothpaste issues in marriage, I've seen my sister, members of my family, my sister, I see her in her married life and the struggle that she's gone through. There's financial, there's issues with, losing children, growing up, kids growing up and maybe kind of going astray. These are always they're modes of suffering through which God sanctifies us. No matter what our vocation is, it's gonna be there. So, yeah, that's about it. Yeah.
Was there like a determining factor for you when discerning your vocation?
That's a good question. I don't know. For me, I was very young when I entered seminary. I was 17. And it really took years, just because it's a confusing thing, and I was a confused person, and still am. I couldn't say that there was. I guess the determining factor was, for me, I learned how. It was more a habit than a sort of event. I gained the habit of feeling okay without. Marriage was the struggle for me, was the thing that was hard for me to give up. So I developed the habit of being okay, not being married or dating or whatever. Does that make sense? So I guess developing the habit was the more critical sort of thing. But one other thing, and it sort of in the same vein, good friendships that were sort of supportive of my vocation. That was really critical too. Yeah, those are the two things I think. Yeah. Other questions? All right. Oh, yeah, sorry.
So why, you chose, how do I say this? Why did you choose a monastic life?
It was less available when I was discerning, because I grew up in Michigan. There wasn't a Chaldean monastery at the time there. I don't think I would have. I don't think it would have been my go-to at the time. I guess it's personality. I don't know. I guess it's personality. Like some people really do find they're really fed by community life, and some people are really. I find myself very nourished by the sort of solitude of having kind of the quiet of getting up. I get up and I say Mass in the morning, and it's the first words that I say out loud is the institution narrative during Mass. So that's nice. Like there's something. But then I think other people would be really crippled by loneliness if they were to try to live in that way. So I think that's more kind of a person. Maybe you can click and do a test for those, Yeah. BuzzFeed, yeah. Find a listicle. Yeah. You won't believe number 6.
Hermit lifestyle kind of.
I'm loving it, yeah.
Okay, cool.
I'm going to circle this. Check into this.
This might be a bit off topic, but how did you feel when you said your first Mass?
I don't feel things. That part of me is broken.
What were you thinking?
You know what I was thinking? Am I saying the words correctly? Because I said it all in Aramaic. And I was really nervous to sing everything correctly. And I didn't. I messed up, but it was funny. No, that was 15 years ago. Gosh, I'm an old man. That was 15 years ago. I don't exactly remember. I remember feeling pretty good.
So you felt?
Felt pretty good. That was the last time I felt anything.
Well, they always use the analogy of the, like your wedding night.
It wasn't like that.
That's what I My point is that it's awkward.
Oh, it's awkward.
It is. I mean, wedding nights are not this romanticized thing. It's it's yeah.
I think you're onto something. Yeah. I don't want to say anything after that. Who asked that question? That was you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, can I add another question?
No. Yeah, Celeste, go.
So I've heard a lot of people say to discern what's right in front of you, right? Or like Dr. P said, you don't go into a corner and just like, okay, now I'm discerning, right? You look at like what your vocation is. Like for us, it's to be a student right now, so let's start with that and do that well.
Sure.
I guess my question is like, at what point, if you're in serious discernment, do you like turn away from the things that are right in front of you to like go and enter a community or something like that?
The answer I would give you is like when you want to. I don't know. when it seems right. I mean, this is the virtue of prudence is a virtue because of the complexities of all the particulars in life. So it's impossible to give general rules for very particular circumstances like yours. So when you particularly, I don't know. Yeah.
Me neither.
Yeah. I don't know if there's somebody else. Do you want to kind of make it into
Yeah, so we can take like 2 or 3 questions from the audience to any of the guest speakers. Just if you have a specific question to one of them, just to make it clear.
Would you all collectively say that following the peace is a good way to discern as well? Like you will always feel peace within
No.
what you really?
No.
All right, go.
Sometimes it's. I get what you're saying. I think there's a sort of inner peace that's maybe always there, but even that sometimes can get shaken.
Okay, so.
The lives of the saints will sort of suggest that as well.
And it's normal for people that are married, because my mom says this all the time. She's like, I should have been a nun. I'm like, bleh. Like my dad like makes her mad. She'll say it just like when she's mad, and my dad will say the same thing. Like.
That's more about your dad.
Which I can totally understand.
Yeah.
But like I've heard that people within the vocation, they're always like, oh, like, you know, there's.
Oh, I don't know. That's my thought. I don't know.
I think there's a lot of crises involved. Like, there's maybe like a deep peace at times, or like there's maybe a peace in the moments that you're asking for it, or that you're seeking it. But there's a lot of like doubts and crises and like figuring it out. I'm like very proud to having life crises. I don't know if anyone else is like that. Where like you're just like so many things hit you at once, and you're like. Am I living my life the right way, right? And like, I'm very over-analytical, I guess I'll say, and that kind of brings in a lot of like fears and doubts and things from all over the place. And so like you do have to cope with those, and just because like they come up doesn't mean like you're in the wrong place. But like if you seek peace and like you're asking in prayer and you're like working through that, things will be clearer. But it's not like all peaceful all the time.
That's just life.
Right.
Right. I mean, just because I have no peace with my children because they're difficult, like that doesn't mean that I get to like just abandon them and go to the monastery. And in the same way, like the monk, right? Now, if the monastery would take them, that's but in the same way that like the monk who like doesn't have peace and sort of is longing for a different I think that's just a natural human struggle. It's that we all go through at times of like every decision. It's like, oh, did I go to the right place? Did I do the right thing? That's just normal.
I've heard these 2 ideas. I've heard purgatory begins now, like purchase of now, whatever. And I've heard also the kingdom of heaven starts now, like be happy now. So like I'm like, what? Because they seem sort of contradictory at times. Like be comfortable and be happy and grateful, but also seek discomfort and grow and challenge yourself.
Don't seek discomfort.
Like,
no, it'll find you. Honestly, it'll find you. Don't be a masochist. No, I mean that. It will find you. Don't put the pebble in your foot, like in your shoe. It's weird. Sorry, I don't know if somebody's like, if that's a piety that people are into, but I think, yeah. You want me to answer a question? Just theologically, it's not literal purgatory and not literal heaven. So heaven is prefigured, and we get a taste of it in the sacraments and especially the Eucharist. But it's not the same as the fullness of the unveiled glory of heaven. So in one sense, yes. And then purgatory starts now just means like, don't just like live in venial sin your entire life. Like, try to become an actual saint right now. Yeah.
So I heard you mention that at a certain point you just need to do what you feel is right. Let's say in your discernment you hear what your vocation should be, but it diverges with your passions. How do you pursue happiness while also making the right choices?
Let me clarify. If I said feel, I did not mean that.
Okay.
Do what you think is right is the advice that I would give.
Okay.
And sometimes passions can diverge from that, and then that's where ethics comes in and how you mold one and to follow the other. But that's the way I would say it. I don't know if I get endorsement from the ethics groups. Does that make sense?
I mean, our feelings, they change, and like they're changeable and moldable, and so like there's a sort of you do what you think's right, and if it's like I don't know, it's hard for me to imagine you really thinking something is right if it's like contrary to your ever deepest instinct, but sometimes you might choose and feel called in a sense to pursue something where your emotions haven't fully come on board yet, and you kind of choose that. Like at one point I decided I wanted to like olives, so I I did. It's like taste change, right? I mean, it's. I thought, I'm going to be a cultured person. I like olives. Now it's the only vegetable my children eat. But
Isn't it like pure sodium?
Probably.
I think also God speaks to us through our emotions and just through our feelings.
We'll agree to disagree. We'll agree to disagree.
I think St. Ignatius is a really good, solid, has a lot of theology on that. I know the Jesuits maybe nowadays don't necessarily adhere to a lot of the initial theology of who Ignatius was and what he learned from the Lord, but he has a lot of really a deeper understanding, not just feelings of in the moment of this is what I want, right? But actually those desires that you have in your heart, those are there for a reason. God put a lot of that in you, or could have, right? There is a sort of figuring out is this something that I want because chocolate cake sounds good right now, or is this something that I want because it's a passion and something that God has truly put in my heart? And if it's something like that is deeply a part of who you are, God's going to use that. It's not necessarily there for nothing. And so I think St. Ignatius could be a really good resource in kind of figuring out how all of that kind of interplays, if that makes sense.
All right, guys, thank you very much.